So it's lesson 2 of COMP1006G, Intro to Web Programming. So what are we doing today? I looked, most of you did the quiz. I think there was only maybe 3 or 4 people in the class who didn't submit the review quiz. So that was due yesterday at 5 p.m. So today's quiz will open up at the end of class and you'll have until next Monday to do it. So let's have a look at what we want to do today. I'll try to include on one of these items with our objectives and a checklist every week, just so you get a sense of where are we going, and then what is it I have to do before next week's class. So today we want to start working with our database, and we want to build PHP pages that can actually connect to and talk to a MySQL database. We're going to look at how do we capture inputs from users so that we can save them to our database, and then we're going to use FTP. You probably did this last semester, or we're going to do it again. So how do we deploy our PHP files? Then how do we actually execute them and run our code in a live internet setting? And then if we have time, we're going to get into version control with Git. And Git can be a bit tricky, so we're going to I'm going to beat you over the head with it for a little while. We're going to use Git a lot. So that everybody gets comfortable with it, because you're going to be using it not only in our classes, but you're going to be using it in a lot of your other classes, and you're also going to be using it out in the work world. So we're going to try and tackle as many of these things as we reasonably can do today. So our first thing, just before we kind of dive into saving of data, is I'm going to use the breakout rooms. I'm going to just automatically put everybody in a room just for 5 minutes. And here's what I want you to do. In the breakout room that you're going to get moved into, the room will just be open for a period of 5 minutes. I want you to make a list with the other people in your room. What did you learn last week about PHP that you didn't know before last week's class? Okay. And I want you to make a list. And when our 5-minute breakout session is over, I'm going to ask if one person from each group can just copy and paste their list into the main chat in our WebEx session. Okay, so only 5 minutes. Talk to the people in your group. You can either use the chat, you can use your microphones. What did you learn about last week that you didn't know before? Okay, so just give me a minute here. I'm going to pause the recording and I'll move you into your breakout rooms for this. All right, so we said it's free, it's widely used, has to run on the server, it can connect to SQL. Syntax is similar to C and Java. It's loosely typed, I think is what you meant. And yeah, works on multiple operating systems. All right, that's great. You've hit on a lot of the really important points. Good job. Okay, Xavier, group 6. So that it's loosely typed. Yep, we can work with different databases. Companies like Facebook use it. Yeah, it works on a server. We hope it's logically coded, yes. Okay, Chris, thanks for posting from your group. Yep, we can connect to MySQL and other databases. You learned how to use WebEx and connecting to IDEs. And yeah, the single and double line comments like other C languages. Thank you. So Deal, yeah, you mentioned it's open source and platform independent. Those are both true. It's loosely typed, meaning we don't have to declare, our variables don't have data types. And yeah, Riley, absolutely integrated with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript to show pages in the browser. All right, well, you know what? That's a good list. Those are the basics. Those are the basic takeaways that we want to have. And I could see from the quizzes, the class average on the quiz was actually 79%, which is a good average. I'm happy with that. And Hannah, yeah, echo statements are faster, and we tend to use echo. We don't really use print or print line like you would like you're used to using in Java. We use echo instead as an output command. All right, that's a good list. So good work. I think we've hit on most of what's important. Okay. So I want to keep these things in mind. I'll just bring my chat over to my other screen here. And again, just a reminder, if you have a question in the middle of class, feel free to use the chat or turn on your mic and let me know if you've got a question. Feel free to stop me. So what we want to do today is look at how do we use PHP to capture data from users in a web page so that we can then save the data. What would be some common examples of the types of web pages or the types of functionality we'd see on websites where we would be capturing data from users and saving it to a database? What would be an example? Yep, an order form, absolutely. Yep, sign up. Yeah, we want to post a review, survey, right? Something like SurveyMonkey. It's all going to be input forms. Anything else? You think of any other common uses for where we're capturing data in web applications? Yep, something like the CRA, information about revenue. Yeah, we're making payments. We're signing up for anything. We're searching. Yeah, these are all great examples. They're the kinds of things we see and do every day. So I'm just going to kind of walk through at a high level what this is going to look like, and then we're going to try it out. Okay. So I like to think of it, if we kind of think about it in analogies, that in a web page, it's kind of like grocery shopping, which is actually the kind of application we're going to build together in class. You know, we go to the grocery store, we collect everything we need, and we put it all in a container, right? We've got a grocery cart to hold all of the things we need. And then when we're done, you know, we can't just walk out of the store. It would be good if we could, but we've got to process everything that we want to buy, right? So we go in a checkout line. That's kind of like submitting a form. And in the checkout line, right, what happens? They tell us how much we owe, and they process our payment before we can leave the store. So kind of when we're collecting data from users in all these things you talked about, payments, surveys, membership, sign up, reviews, the same thing. We've got to collect data from users first, and then we need some kind of processing in order to sort of complete the transaction, which in the grocery store is paying. And in a web application, it's saving that information from the users to our database. You know, maybe that information is a new social media post. You know, I'm typing in some text, I'm adding a media file to it, and I want to save that into a social media database, for example. So there's sort of two sides to this. There's the collection side, and there's the processing side. So typically in PHP, we use two different pages for this. One to collect the information and one to actually process it. So in terms of collecting data, what we typically use is an HTML form. And you probably worked with forms a little bit in your HTML class last semester. Can you remind me who you had for your web fundamentals? Was it Jessica? Or Scott? Oh yeah, it's Scott. Okay, they're both amazing. Right? So probably you worked with forms a little bit with Scott. I imagine designing HTML forms. Yep. Okay. So not totally new. So forms are kind of, it's a little bit art and a little bit science, right? What's important when we're designing forms is we want to make it easy for users to give us the information our application needs. If we design our forms badly, people get frustrated. They're going to leave our site. They're not going to register, post a review, make an order, whatever it is we want them to do. Right? So the interface kind of depends on what are we asking for. And the examples I've mentioned in my slides are all examples that you've mentioned in the chat previously. So we need to build some interface that's easy for users to give us the information we're looking for. So how do we build a form? Well, the form, that's kind of like the container, we've got an opening and a closing form tag. Now, these are invisible, so you don't actually see these forms anywhere. But the form kind of, it serves like the grocery cart. So collecting inputs from users without a form would be like shopping without a cart, taking items off the shelf and throwing them on the floor. We need something to hold those items that we're purchasing. So within our opening form tag, we've got to set a couple attributes. And the first one we use is the method. And this is really important. 99% of the time, we're going to use the method value of post. And we're going to talk about why a bit later today. What would the other option be that we might use like 1% of the time for our form method? Yeah, that's right, Megan. We could use post, we could use get. And we'll try both today and we'll look at the differences. And Ivan, yeah, you mentioned it as well. Thank you. So typical form tag is going to look something like this. And I know I may be kind of reviewing stuff you learned a bit with Scott already. Yeah, Shazia, they both do, but they behave differently. So the values are stored for both post and get, but they're processed differently, and we'll look at them today. So great question. We'll come back to this in a bit. So typical form, opening form tag, we've got a method attribute, which usually we're going to use post. We're going to use get once in this course right near the end. Other than that, every other form we build is going to use post. And then we also have an action. This is the page that's going to process or receive the form submission when the user submits it. Now, we don't technically have to have a second page as our form action. A form can post to itself, but it gets messy because then one PHP file has to have two different purposes. It's got to collect the information from the user, and then it's got to process the information. So I find in PHP it's much cleaner to break these into two files. So our form is one file where we gather the information, and then our action page processes it as a separate file. And that separate file has to have a PHP extension because we want to write PHP code in there to process it. So whatever information we want from our user, we're going to have user input controls. If we need their first name, we're going to give them a text box where they can enter their first name. And as much as possible in our forms, if we can give users choices and let them click from a drop-down list or radio buttons, we want to do that because it controls the input and it also makes it faster for users to complete. And typically at the bottom, we've got some kind of submit button that will then submit the form to the server for processing. And that's where our PHP code takes over. So our forms are mostly HTML, but then our processing page is going to be all PHP. So we've got different kinds of controls. Here are the most common ones. You're all familiar with them, both from Scott's class and just because you've been living on the internet like everybody else in the modern world for years. So our default input are single line text boxes. We can have drop-down lists, radio buttons, checkboxes, text areas, so where we want users to enter big block of text, we'd use a text area control. There are other kinds of inputs, but these are the most common ones. What's the difference between, let's say, here, a select box and a radio button? How would you decide? You could use either one if we want to give the user a list of choices and have them pick one. How would you decide when to use a select box and when to use a radio button? Yep, the select box takes up less space. That's true. Yep, Taryn, we could use a checkbox list if we wanted multiple. Yeah, typically radio buttons in HTML is only a single selection. So radio is like a toggle. So the big decision, typically these are used for both selecting a single item from a list. Yeah, so these are the two questions, Megan. I think Megan and Ivan, you kind of hit on the two questions we ask ourselves. Number one, how much space do we have? Right? Because the radio buttons, in a sense, take up more space because we're displaying all the choices. At the same time, if we have a really long list, like radio buttons really only work if we've maybe got 3 or 4 choices. If we're picking, listing all the cities in Ontario, well, radio buttons aren't going to be a realistic option because we're going to have hundreds of radio buttons. In that case, a select box makes more sense. So they both work, and this is part of the art of designing forms, is asking ourselves, we have different controls, which one is going to be the easiest for the users to use, and which is going to fit the best in our user interface. So what does this look like? I'll just kind of blow this slide up a little bit. So first we've got an HTML form. Our user fills out the form, whether it's a comment form, registration form, doesn't really matter what the form is capturing. So we give them an HTML or a PHP file. No, Shazil, they don't. Good question. Same amount of memory. So it's really more of a user interface decision. So we give them a page with a form. We ask the user to fill it out. And typically they're going to click the submit button, and that's going to usually use the post method, which submits the form values. And those values are kind of received or processed by our action page, our second page. And then on this PHP page, we're using server-side script to interpret the values. So we may want to check and validate that the values entered by our user make sense. And if we're happy that what they've given, so for example, if it's a registration form and they put in 1 character as the password, we'll want to check that on our processing page and make sure they've followed our password rules. If all the data is valid, we're then going to use PHP to connect to the database and save the information in there. So for example, user registration, we'll create a new user account so a user can log back into our site in the future. So all forms in PHP, they all kind of work the same way. We build a page with a form with all the inputs. When that form is posted, we send that to a PHP page that processes the inputs, connects to the database, and saves the new data. So we're going to try all of this today. So what does some of the code look like? And Shazil, I think this comes back to what you said earlier. So all of the form values are automatically added by the PHP processor to a collection or an array with this name, $_post. If our form method is get, we would interpret the values with our $_get collection. Yes, I think this is what you're referring to. So this is built into PHP. So it's an array, it's a list of related values. So it will basically give us all of the values entered by the user. So let's say, for example, our form had a field called first_name. If we wanted to read the value the user had typed, we would reference it as $_post, square bracket, single quote, first_name. And this has to match exactly the name of the control in our form input. And here in this code example, we're taking this value the user typed in and we're saving it in a variable. So most of the time when we have forms, we're asking users for data. Usually we want to save that data to the database. So we need a table in the database. And this is kind of part of what you're learning in your class with Darcy. Correct. Yep, Ivan, the slides are already on D2L. I always put them up. So you don't have to take notes. They're right here. So whenever I have slides, they are right here. Lesson 2, saving data. So you can download these, you can make notes on them. I will always post them for you. I won't have a slide deck every week, but whenever I do, they're on D2L for you. And if ever they're not, let me know. So we need a table, we need to define the structure, right? So if we want to ask customers, we want to build a reviews page on our website, we need a reviews table in the database where we figured out what are all the fields we want to store for a review. And then our form, it's going to match. And then we build a form with the input fields that match the columns in the database. So if we have, for example, in our table, we have a 5-star rating, we're going to want a 5-star rating input somewhere on our form. So then our PHP page accepts the form inputs, it connects to the database, and it uses SQL, which you're learning with Darcy. So you can learn how do we save, how do we insert new data into the table. So the first thing we want to do Actually, you know what? We'll come back to this. We'll come back to building our table in a bit. First, we're just going to look at the form and processing part without the database. Once we get that to work, then we're going to bring the database in. For now, we want to look at how do we build a simple form and submit data that we can then interpret with PHP. Once we have that working, we'll actually build the database table and we can save information to our database today. Okay? So, first thing I'm going to do is I need to start my local web server. So I'm going to open up my XAMPP control panel, and I'm going to start my Apache web server, which, as we talked about last week, for me, it runs on port 800. For you, it should just run on the default port 80. Now, if your MySQL server is running, yours may already be running. Mine isn't. I've disabled it at startup. When you install it, it should run automatically at startup unless you disable it. So I'm just going to click Start beside MySQL as well. As I said, yours may be green already, which means you don't need to start it. It's already running. And now I'm going to open up my PHP code editor. And we'll try building our first form. Keep it really simple to start. So I'm going to open up my project from last week. Where we built a couple of pages. Yep, sure, Ivan, go right ahead. Yep. Technically, just for XAMPP, you don't, but we're going to shortly connect to our database on AWS. And in order to connect to AWS, you will need the VPN on. So for the first part of this exercise, I'm not going to turn the VPN on, but I will turn it on shortly. I'll connect to it. For right now, we don't need it yet, but we will. Good question. So we're going to make a registration page. It's not going to connect to the database today, but we'll come back to this later on in the course when we do our lesson about authentication. So I'm going to, up at the very top, my lamp food folder, I'm going to create a new PHP file. And I'm going to call it register.php. Yeah, Nick, we can maybe take a look later. MySQL may already be running, so check the error. Now, I've set up my PHP storm. Notice when I create a PHP file, it gives me this template of a full HTML page. I've changed some of my settings in PHP storm to do this. I think when you guys, by default, when you create a PHP page, it's blank, isn't it? You want to just confirm that for me. Okay, I'm going to show you how to fix that. Okay, yeah, so Nick, that means MySQL is already running, so you should be fine. You don't need to start it. Yeah, absolutely. You can use Visual Studio Code if you prefer it, no problem, for sure. So here's how to get this HTML template so that every time we create a new PHP page, we automatically get the startup HTML. So let's do this. Let's go to File and Settings. Haven't done this for a little bit, so bear with me. It takes me a minute. Under Settings, I'm going to search for Template. No, it would be different in if you're in Visual Studio. So if I go to File and Code Templates. So again, I'll show you. I went to File and Settings. I search for the word template. And under HTML file, it gives me this HTML template. So I'm going to highlight all of this and copy it. And then further down in the list, I have my PHP file template. So I'm just going to click this. And then if you paste it in here and click OK, that will then copy the HTML template for any new PHP files you make. So now when you go to create a new PHP file, it will look like this instead of just having an empty page with a PHP tag at the top. You don't have to do this. It just saves a little bit of time. So Jack Lee, if you're using Visual Studio Code, there's probably a way to set up a template there as well, but you may have to play around with it a little bit. Yeah, okay, I'll go from the beginning again. So click File, Settings, search for Template, and then choose File and Code Templates. So you can see it's highlighted in blue. The first item here is HTML file, so click on it and then highlight all of this code and copy it. And then when you go down to the PHP file, then you can just paste it in and click OK. So now when you create a new file, when you choose a new PHP file, it now has all of this HTML there as a default template for you. Okay, no problem. So I'm going to change my title here. I'll just change this to say, let's say user registration. And we're going to create a simple form. And one of the things I like about PHP Storm, I like the code hinting. So I type form, right away I get method equals, and if I click on it, I then get the two options of get and post. I'm going to pick post. And what's the other attribute we should add here to our form besides the method? Yep, you got it, Sammy. Thank you. We'll say action. And now it wants to know, okay, what's the name of the next page? Taryn, up to you. You can, yes. You can indent it, and I probably will because it's inside the body tag. Doesn't have to be. So we're going to post to a page called Save Registration, and that page must have a PHP extension. Then I'll close my tag. PHP Storm automatically generates the closing tag. Now this is a common gotcha. It's really important, and I'll show you why, that everything goes in between the opening and closing tags. It's really common that people create forms, but then they write everything below the form because the form is invisible. We don't actually see anything. Darren, I like your suggestion, so yeah, I'll indent it. So for starters, we'll just use a field set tag, and we'll put on a label and a simple text input. So put on a label. And what HTML tag do we need here just to generate a text box, single line text box? Thanks, Christopher. Yep. So we just need an input, and we'll give it a name of username. I'll also give it an ID of username. I'm always going to use all lowercase while I'm naming things for consistency, because PHP is case sensitive. I could specify type equals text, but I don't need to because that's the default. If I don't specify a type, it automatically renders as a text input. So here's my code so far. I'll just put it up here as well if you need it on Pastebin. I like to use this when we're doing a lot of code in class. Sometimes people find it easier if you need. Here's the link, if that helps. Some students actually in year 2 of Lakehead suggested I use Pastebin last semester, which I think is kind of a big help, can be a big help. So you can grab the code from there if you need it. So I want to try out this page in my browser and see how it looks. So I'll just go to my localhost 800, lamp food, and open up register.php. So here's what I get. Sorry, Mason, didn't quite place which part. The code I put in the Pastebin, you mean? Yes, so where do you save it? So I created this folder last week. It has to go in the htdocs folder, yes. But rather than put it right in the root, I've created a folder called lamp food because I have different websites running in my XAMPP. And if I go and load my XAMPP folder, I have all kinds of different PHP projects here. So in C, XAMPP, htdocs, right? I have some client sites. I have, here's one I did back a few years ago. So I created a folder for our class. I called it the Lamp Food Project. So all my files I'm going to save in here. But yes, thanks. You're right. It does go in htdocs is the folder. So here's what it looks like so far. We've got this field set, which creates a border. I've got a username, a label that says username, and then I have a single line text box. So we really only need one more thing on this page for now. We'll add a password field, but we'll add that later. So inside my form, I want to add a button. And my button can just say register. So let's add that button to the bottom. Let's try to move this around so we can both see the website and the code at the same time. So now if I refresh, I've got a register button here. So what will happen if we click the register button? Either nothing will happen, we'll get an error, or something new will load in our browser. So Ivan, you think we'll go to the save registration page? Okay, any other predictions? What will happen? You agree with Ivan? Okay, so what will the error be? You say does nothing? Okay. So some people think nothing will happen. Okay, well, let's click it and see. So it does submit the form, but we get a 404 not found error. How come? Why do we get a page not found error when I submit the form? You got it. Right, Adil and Adam, exactly. So we've created our form, but the page it's calling to do the processing, well, we did link to it with the action, but this page doesn't exist yet. Right? If I go and look in my lamp food directory, we don't have a file called save registration.php. So we've kind of got the sound of one hand clapping here. Right? We've got a container, a shopping cart, but there's no place to go and check out. We put information in our form, like we've put groceries in the cart, but there's no checkout line to process it yet. So to fix this, we now need to create save registration.php. So I'm going to make a new page, a new PHP file, and it has to match this name exactly. Save-registration. The file extension is already here by default, so we don't have to type in the extension. So make a new page called save-registration.php. I'll just put in a title here. And then I'm going to go back to my browser and try this again. What will happen this time if I go back and try to submit my form now? What result will we get? Will we still get an error? Yeah, Adil, that's right. We'll now get, there we go. Right? So nothing's really happening, but now our error, our 404, it's gone. Yeah, it does say saving your registration, even though we don't yet have any code happening on this page. Okay, so here is your challenge. I'll show you the solution in a minute, but see if you can figure out how can we print the username entered here on this page. So I'll give you a couple minutes. See if you can write the PHP code on the save registration page. Yeah, no problem, Taryn. I'll put it up in just 1 second. See if you can write the code to go on the save registration page that will display the value the user entered here. And again, you can refer to the slides up here on D2L. I will put that code back up for you, Taryn. So I'll give you a minute to try and sort that out. If you have a solution, post it in the chat. We'll try it out, and then we'll take a quick break. Sorry, Ivan. Okay. So Ivan Mason, just a question for you guys. Did you create a folder called Lamp Food in your HT docs? Okay, so Mason, for you, it would be this. Be localhost / lamp food . So Ivan, is your page saved right in the root of htdocs? Okay, it should show you in your code editor. If you open your folder, it'll show you which folder you're in. Yeah, I had to use port 800, but you don't have to. I have another web server running on port 80. So that's why I needed :800 in my URL, and you don't. Okay, so Ivan, if your file is directly in htdocs, then you're going to just access it this way, localhost/register.php. I don't recommend leaving your files right in htdocs like this, because you might have different files for different websites. Like, we're going to build one website together in class, but you're going to build a different project for your assignments. And some of the names of the files may be the same. So I would strongly recommend, Ivan, creating inside of htdocs, I would create a folder called lamp food and move all the files that we're doing in class inside of it. So has anybody found a solution how we can display the value here? So if I type something here, how do I display it on my save page? All right, Chris, that looks good. Let's try that out. Thanks for the suggestion. So in here, I'm going to open up a set of PHP tags, and I'll just put a comment in here. So we use $post username. All right, that looks good, Chris. Let's try that out. And again, make sure that's got to be inside a set of PHP tags. So if I just hit refresh here and say resend any information to this page, it now displays whatever I've typed in the input form at 252. If I take my username out, it's blank. So this was the basics, kind of our simplest possible version of using a form to capture data and using PHP to process or interpret any of the values in the form. So we have a simple form with post as the method. We've got an action and one input. And when we post the form, we can use $_post to then display whatever value was in our form. Now there's a few gotchas here that we'll look at, but it's 2:53. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to take a pause here and stop the recording. I'm going to encourage you to get up and stretch your legs for a few minutes, and we'll come back in 10 minutes and we'll look at some of those gotchas. And then we're going to look at, okay, well, how do we connect this up to our database next? Okay, so we'll come back in 10 minutes.